I always thought betrayal had a certain dramatic flair. Like in movies, where a guy walks into a candlelit restaurant and sees his wife laughing a little too hard at some guy's joke, her hand accidentally brushing his arm. Or maybe in a courtroom, where some high-priced lawyer dramatically slaps down a stack of incriminating photos while the wife gasps, clutching her pearls. But life? Life doesn't do grand reveals. No, life prefers to unravel slowly, one bizarre, gut-punching moment at a time. And in my case, life had a sense of humor. It started with my boss. Now, before you assume this is one of those my boss is the villain kind of stories, let me be clear. Robert Whitmore III was not a villain. He was a walking cliché in khaki slacks. A man who called every woman kiddo, no matter her age, laughed too loudly at his own jokes, and had the leadership skills of a damp sponge. The only thing he ever led was office birthday parties where he insisted on singing the entire Happy Birthday song in an operatic voice. So, when Robert, of all people, called me into his office one Thursday afternoon and said, "Mateo, I think you should sit down," I did what any normal person would do. I panicked. Had I accidentally sent my sarcastic email about our inspiring Monday meetings to him instead of my coworker? Had I forgotten to mute myself on Zoom while I whispered about how he looked like a divorced dad trying to reconnect with his kids through awkward fist bumps? I braced myself. And then Robert, looking uncharacteristically serious, pushed a glossy real estate brochure across the desk. A mansion. Not just a house, a mansion. One of those places with a name like Everwood Manor or Whispering Pines, as if rich people can't just live at 1346 Maple Street like the rest of us. "Okay," I said slowly, picking it up. "Are we moving the office to a castle?" Robert leaned forward, lowering his voice like we were in a spy movie. "I know this is weird, but doesn't this look familiar to you?" I frowned, flipping through the pages, and then my stomach twisted. I did recognize it. Not from the outside. No, I'd never stepped foot inside a home that had its own wine cellar and a library with one of those rolling ladders. But the inside, the furniture, the kitchen, the ridiculous glass dining table that looked impossible to clean. I had seen it, many times, in Charlotte's photos. Robert nodded grimly as he watched my face. That's what I thought. I stared at him, my mouth suddenly dry. "What is this?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Mateo, I didn't know how to bring this up, but my wife, well, ex-wife now, had a thing for these ridiculous real estate tours. She'd go to open houses of places she couldn't afford, pretend she was interested, and take a million pictures. I always thought it was just harmless fun. And I prompted, because clearly, we were still circling whatever landmine he was about to throw me onto. Robert tapped the brochure. "This house belongs to a client of mine, a very wealthy client. And last week, when I was over there finalizing some paperwork, guess what I saw in the kitchen?" I waited. "My wife." I blinked. "Your ex-wife?" "No, my current wife, at the time, who was not supposed to be there." Robert clenched his jaw. She was wearing one of those expensive silk robes, drinking coffee like she lived there. And she wasn't alone. I had a terrible feeling about where this was going. "She was with your wife." If my life had sound effects, this is where the record scratch would have happened. I laughed. I actually laughed, because my brain refused to process anything else. That's funny, Robert. You should take that to an open mic night." He just shook his head. "Mateo, I wouldn't joke about this." No, he wouldn't. Robert wasn't clever enough to make up something this insane. I sat there, gripping the edge of the desk like it might hold me to reality. Charlotte, my wife, in some mansion, drinking coffee in a silk robe, with Robert's wife. It still didn't make sense. "So what are you telling me?" I said finally. "That our wives are, I don't know, business partners? Maybe they run some weird real estate Instagram page together." Robert gave me a look of pure pity. "Mateo," he said, his voice gentle, like he was telling a child that Santa wasn't real. "It's not their house." The words hovered in the air between us, thick and heavy. I swallowed hard. "Then whose house is it?" Robert's face darkened. "That's what I wanted to find out." So, After my wife packed up her things and moved out, I did some digging. And guess who owns that mansion? I didn't want to know, but of course, he told me anyway. Isaac Montgomery. I blinked again. Isaac Montgomery. As in my boss's boss. The man who only showed up at company events long enough to shake hands and remind us all that we were one big family before disappearing into his custom Bentley. The kind of man who probably didn't even know my name, let alone the name of my wife. Except, apparently, he did, because Charlotte had been at his house, wearing his robe, drinking his coffee. I sat back in my chair, letting that sink in. Huh. That was all I could say. Because really, what else was there? Robert nodded solemnly, like he understood exactly what was happening in my brain. Huh, he echoed. We sat there in silence. Two men who had just realized that their wives had been using their marriage vows as suggestions rather than promises. Eventually, I stood up, running a hand through my hair. Well, that's something. Robert sighed. Yeah. I adjusted my tie, straightened my sleeves, and nodded. Guess I should go have a conversation with my wife, huh? Robert patted my shoulder. Good luck, kiddo. I glared at him. Even now, he couldn't resist. And just like that, I walked out of his office, into the cruel, stupid, ridiculous reality that was now my life. If you've ever had to confront your spouse about potential infidelity, you'll know there's a special kind of exhaustion that hits you before you even open your mouth. It's the kind of exhaustion that makes you want to just go to sleep and wake up in an alternate reality where everything is fine. Your wife is loyal, and you never had to sit in your boss's office while he showed you evidence that your personal life was competing in the worst plot twist of the year awards. But I didn't have that luxury. So, I did what any rational man in my position would do. I took the rest of the day off, went home, and prepared for the most awkward conversation of my life. Charlotte wasn't home yet. That was no surprise. Lately, she'd been out a lot. Meetings, she always said. Brunch with the girls, or book club. Which was fascinating, considering I'd never seen a single book enter our house that wasn't a cookbook or some influencer's guide to intermittent fasting. I sat in our living room, staring at the framed wedding photos on the shelf. There we were, all smiles, looking like one of those couples who probably had matching pajamas and took holiday pictures where the dog wore a Santa hat. I never thought I'd be the guy who got blindsided like this, but apparently, life had other plans. By the time Charlotte finally walked in, I had already rehearsed about 100 different ways to approach the conversation. Should I be casual? Direct? Should I play moron and see if she confessed on her own? But before I could say anything, she spoke first. Hey, she said, dropping her purse on the counter. You're home early. It wasn't a question, just an observation. The kind of observation that said, oh, you weren't supposed to be here yet. This might be a problem. I leaned back on the couch, arms crossed. Yeah, had an interesting day. She didn't even blink. Oh. I took a deep breath. Robert pulled me into his office. Said he saw something unexpected. Charlotte didn't flinch. She just set her keys down, calmly, methodically. And what was that? I expected panic, shock, some kind of reaction. Instead, she was curious. This was already not going how I thought it would. I exhaled, keeping my voice even. He found his wife at a house she wasn't supposed to be in. Now, finally, something changed. A flicker of something, too fast for me to read, crossed her face. And I continued, she wasn't alone. Silence. I waited. Charlotte just stared at me. This was the moment where a normal, guilty person would scramble for an excuse, get defensive, or at the very least, pretend to be confused. But Charlotte? No. She just tilted her head slightly, almost like she was studying me. And then she did something that made my stomach drop. She smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic smile. A genuine, relaxed, amused smile. And in that moment, I knew. I did not know this woman at all. I had spent 10 years of my life thinking I was married to one kind of person, only to realize that whoever was standing in front of me was someone completely different. Charlotte walked over, slowly, sitting down across from me. So, let me get this straight, she said, tapping her fingers on the arm of the chair. Robert tells you he saw his wife at a house she shouldn't have been in. With me. And your first assumption is, what, exactly? I blinked. That you were there for a reason that wasn't strictly legal. Charlotte laughed. Laughed. A short, amused chuckle, like I just told her some ridiculous gossip. Mateo, please. Please what? Please pretend this wasn't happening? Please act like I hadn't just discovered that my wife was spending time in my boss's house, wearing what I could only assume was his robe, drinking his expensive, custom-imported, overpriced, hand-picked by monks in the Himalayas coffee? Help me out here, I said, voice flat, because I'm struggling to see the innocent explanation for this one. Charlotte leaned back, looking almost bored. You know, I always thought you were smart. But you're really not great at putting pieces together, are you? And that was when it hit me. The way she wasn't panicking. The way she wasn't denying anything. The way she looked more entertained than guilty. She wanted me to find out. This wasn't some messy, emotional mistake that had spiraled out of control. This was something else entirely. Something planned. I sat up, suddenly feeling like I was playing a game where I didn't even know the rules. You're enjoying this? Charlotte shrugged. I wouldn't say enjoying. No? I scoffed. Because from where I'm sitting, you don't seem particularly remorseful. She tilted her head. Should I be? I didn't even know how to respond to that. I mean, let's be real, she continued. You weren't exactly thriving in this marriage, Mateo. I blinked. Excuse me? She waved a hand. Come on. You wake up, go to work, come home, and complain about your boss. Rinse and repeat. When was the last time we actually did something interesting? Oh, I don't know, I said deadpan. Maybe the time my wife decided to take up a secret second life in my boss's mansion? Charlotte sighed. You're being dramatic. You cheated on me. She rolled her eyes. Okay, sure. If you want to call it that. I stared at her, mouth open. What else would I call it? And then, just when I thought this conversation couldn't possibly get any more ridiculous, Charlotte leaned in, resting her chin on her hand, and said, You ever considered the possibility that I was doing you a favor? I actually laughed. Oh, this should be good. Please, enlighten me. Charlotte smiled again, and this time, there was something almost pitying about it. You've spent so much time being the responsible one, Mateo, the good husband. The guy who plays by the rules. But tell me something. Where did that ever get you? I folded my arms. Well, until today, it got me a wife who, I thought, wasn't sleeping with my boss. Charlotte smirked. You should be thanking me. Oh, of course, I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. How could I be so ungrateful? Charlotte just stood, brushing off her skirt like this was any other casual Thursday night discussion. You'll understand eventually. I raised an eyebrow. Understand what, exactly? She grabbed her keys. That this was never your story, Mateo. It was mine. And with that, she walked out, leaving me sitting there, in my own house, wondering how well, you get the idea. I had just lost a fight I didn't even know I was having. I sat there, staring at the door, wondering how I had just been dismissed from my own marriage like an underperforming employee. No fight, no begging, no guilt. Just Charlotte standing up, dropping some cryptic nonsense, and leaving me with the kind of confusion usually reserved for people who try to read legal documents without a lawyer present. I did the only thing I could think of. I checked the bank accounts. Because if my wife was going around acting like she had some grand master plan, I figured step one of figuring it out was making sure I wasn't funding it. Now, here's where things got interesting. Everything looked normal. Bills were paid. Grocery store charges. A couple of online shopping transactions. Nothing that screamed secret double life. But then, something stood out. A withdrawal. A large withdrawal. Not large enough to buy a mansion, but large enough to make me sit up straighter. It had been made a month ago from an account we rarely used. The one we originally opened for future vacation savings, but never touched because somehow, every year, something more urgent came up. Car repairs, home maintenance. The time Charlotte decided she needed a new home office setup for a business venture that never materialized. I clicked on the transaction details. The money had been transferred to a name I didn't recognize. Jonas Reed. I leaned back in my chair. Jonas Reed. Who was that? A lawyer? A business partner? Some guy Charlotte met at one of those networking events that never actually resulted in any networking? I grabbed my phone, ready to search the name, but then another thought hit me. I went to our closet. Not because I was having some dramatic she's really gone moment, but because if my wife was pulling whatever this was, I needed to know if she had packed for a weekend getaway or if this was a full-blown escape plan. The closet looked half empty, not completely cleared out, but enough to tell me she'd taken her favorites. She wasn't planning on sneaking back in to grab a few things. She was gone. But here's the thing. She hadn't taken everything, and what she had left behind. That's what made this whole situation even stranger. First, her laptop. Not an old one, not a spare. Her laptop. The one she used every day. Second, her planner. The one she never let out of her sight because, in her words, everything important is in there. And then, the real kicker, her wedding ring. Not tucked away in some drawer or left meaningfully on my nightstand, but just sitting there, in the closet, next to an empty shoebox, like she had taken it off without a second thought. I stood there, trying to piece it together. Charlotte was methodical. She didn't do things halfway. If she was really leaving me behind, she wouldn't have left behind things that mattered. So what was this? An accident? A mistake? Or was it intentional? I grabbed the planner and the laptop and went back to the living room. First, the planner. I flipped through it quickly, expecting, what? A confession? A detailed itinerary of her betrayal? Wednesday, yoga. Thursday, dinner with Isaac. Friday, destroy Mateo's faith in humanity. Of course, there was nothing like that. But there was something. A list. Hidden in the back, scribbled hastily like she didn't want it to be there, but also couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. Jonas Reed, $25,000. Marcus, $4,000. Debt cleared, 06/21. New start 06 to 30. I stared at the dates. Today was June 28th. Charlotte wasn't just leaving. She was leaving in 2 days. And the kicker? She had already cleared some kind of debt before doing it. I opened her laptop. No password. Strange, considering she had always been careful about security. Emails, messages, documents. I scanned through everything, looking for something, anything, that would explain what I was dealing with. And then I found the email. Sent 3 weeks ago. Subject, final agreement, terms confirmed. I clicked on it. It wasn't long. Just a short confirmation. Jonas, everything is finalized. No complications. We proceed on the 30th as planned. Thank you for making this easy. Charlotte. I closed the laptop, running a hand down my face. So, to recap, Charlotte had transferred a large sum of money to a man I didn't know. She had settled some kind of debt. She was planning something for June 30th. She had left behind the things she shouldn't have, like her laptop, planner, and wedding ring. And the worst part? She had walked out of here like I was the one who didn't understand what was happening. I had 2 days to figure out the truth. And I wasn't about to sit around waiting for Charlotte to grace me with her explanation. 2 days. That's all I had. Not to save my marriage. No, that was long gone. But to figure out exactly what kind of show Charlotte was putting on before she disappeared like a magician with a taxpayer-funded retirement plan. I wasn't going to waste time confronting her directly. She had already proven she could talk circles around me while making me feel like I had missed an entire season of whatever drama she was starring in. No, if I wanted answers, I needed to be smarter. And smarter meant starting with the name that had been sitting in my wife's bank transactions like an unanswered email, Jonas Reed. Now, in situations like these, most people would hire a private investigator, dig through public records, or maybe follow their soon-to-be ex around town with the subtlety of a reality show cameraman. But I had something better. I had coworkers who hated their jobs and loved gossip. So I sent a text to the most reliable person I knew for this kind of thing, Karen from accounting. Karen had 2 skills, finding financial discrepancies and knowing everyone's business. If you ever needed to know who in the office was secretly dating, who was about to get fired, or who had an allegedly illegal side hustle, Karen was the woman to ask. I sent her a simple message. Ever heard of a Jonas Reed? Within minutes, she responded. LOL. Oh, you're in for a treat. Call me. I called. First of all, Karen started. not even bothering with a hello. How do you know that name? Long story, I said. What do you know? Oh, everything, she said, sounding way too excited. Jonas Reed is basically a professional problem solver for rich people. You know, the type who need things handled quietly. I frowned. Handled how? Well, depends on the problem, she said. Some people hire him for security, some for legal loopholes, some for things that sound sketchy but are technically not illegal. And my wife sent him 25 grand? There was a pause. Then Karen exhaled. Oof, that's not pocket change. No kidding. Look, I don't know what she's using him for, but if it's Jonas Reed, then whatever she's planning, it's already halfway done. I rubbed my temples. Great. Fantastic. My wife wasn't just cheating. She was outsourcing it like a Fortune 500 company. I thanked Karen and hung up. I had to move fast. Step 1. Find Jonas Reed. Step 2. Figure out what Charlotte was planning before she disappeared into whatever new start she had scribbled down in her planner like a bad self-help slogan. So, I did what any man in my position would do. I pretended to be a client. I found Jonas Reed's website, because of course, even shady professionals need good branding, and sent a quick message through his contact form. Looking for urgent, discreet assistance. High stakes. Willing to pay for results. Need to meet ASAP. Within 30 minutes, I had a reply. Meet at 10 a.m. Office address below. Come alone. I showed up the next morning, dressed in the best. I definitely have important, private matters to discuss outfit I could put together. Jonas Reed's office was exactly what I expected. Minimalist, expensive-looking, and the kind of place where people definitely signed NDAs before discussing anything. Jonas himself? Late 40s, sharp suit, the kind of smile that said, I know exactly how much you're worth before you even introduce yourself. Mr. Turner, he said, motioning for me to sit. What can I do for you? Saturday, I'll get straight to the point. I know my wife hired you. No reaction. He just leaned back, waiting. I want to know why. He exhaled. Mr. Turner, my clients value privacy. I can't discuss. I'll pay double. That got his attention. His eyes flickered with amusement. You're not the first husband to come here looking for answers. I don't need all the details, I said. I just need to know what I'm dealing with before she disappears in 2 days. Jonas studied me. Then, after a long pause, he sighed. Your wife didn't hire me for an affair, if that's what you're thinking. I stared at him. Then what? Another pause. Then he finally said it. She hired me to erase something. My stomach twisted. Erase what? Jonas shook his head. That's all I can say. I stood up. I'll find out either way. He smirked. I know. I left. And that's when I realized Charlotte wasn't just cheating. She was removing something from her past. And I had 2 days to figure out what. 2 days. That's all I had. 2 days before Charlotte made whatever grand exit she had planned. 2 days to turn the tables before she vanished into her new start, pretending like I had never existed. Jonas Reed had given me just enough information to be dangerous. She wasn't just cheating. She was erasing something. The problem was, I didn't know what. And if I wanted revenge, the kind of revenge that doesn't land you in prison but still makes the other person regret waking up in the morning, I needed to figure it out fast. So, I did what any reasonable man in my position would do. I made her think I already knew everything. It started with a text. Mateo. So, you really thought I wouldn't find out? I watched the read receipt pop up within seconds. And then nothing. No reply. No call. Just that long, thoughtful silence of someone trying to figure out just how much of their carefully crafted lie had just crumbled. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then finally. Charlotte. Find out what exactly? Classic. Act calm. Play moron. Try to regain control. I smirked. Mateo. You know what? You really thought I wouldn't check? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, Charlotte. I think we should talk in person. Oh, now she wanted to talk. When I was the one asking questions. When she wasn't the one leading the conversation. No, not yet. Mateo. Why? So you can lie to my face too? I imagined her sitting wherever she was, gripping her phone, knowing she had lost the upper hand but still scrambling to get it back. And then, the move I was waiting for. "Charlotte, fine. What do you want?" There it was. A confession without actually confessing. I had her, but I wasn't done yet. Step 2 of my revenge plan required an extra set of hands, someone who had just as much reason to be invested in this mess as I did. Robert, my boss, the man whose wife had been tangled up in whatever Charlotte was doing, the man who had been sitting in his office, watching his marriage collapse in real time, just like I had. I called him. "Matteo," he answered, sounding tired. "Tell me you have something." "I don't just have something," I said. "I have a plan." 10 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other at a coffee shop, laying out the next steps. Charlotte thought she was in control. She thought she had every detail locked down. But the problem with people like her? They never expect pushback. They assume everyone will react emotionally, get angry, demand answers. They never expect someone to use their tactics against them. So we gave her exactly what she didn't see coming. A message from Robert's wife. "Robert's wife, you're not as careful as you think you are. I know everything. We all do." I could imagine Charlotte's face when she read that. The way her stomach must have dropped. The way her entire meticulously planned escape must have suddenly felt like a house of cards about to collapse. She replied in under a minute. "Charlotte, who is this?" No answer. 10 minutes later, another message. "Charlotte, we need to talk." 15 minutes after that, my phone buzzed. "Charlotte, where are you?" Now she was the one chasing me. I let her sweat for a while. Then, finally, I responded. "Matteo, come home. Now." I didn't expect her to listen. I expected her to dodge, delay, try to flip the conversation back onto me. But instead, "Charlotte, on my way." Huh. Interesting. I waited. And 20 minutes later, Charlotte walked through the front door. She looked different. Not guilty. Not ashamed. Just calculating. "You found out," she said, setting her purse down. I nodded. "Sure did." She exhaled, crossing her arms. And what? Did she think I was going to just accept whatever this was? That I'd be the heartbroken husband who quietly packed a suitcase and let her have her perfect little escape? Not a chance. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "Tell me, Charlotte, how much did you pay to make this disappear?" A flicker of something. Annoyance, maybe. "Does it matter?" she said. I laughed. "You tell me." She didn't answer. "So what was it?" I pressed. "A crime? A secret identity? Maybe a long-lost twin?" Charlotte rolled her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous." "Then explain it." A pause. And then, "It's handled," she said. That was it. No denial. No excuses. Just a statement, like that was supposed to be enough. I shook my head. "You really think you're going to walk away from this clean?" Charlotte tilted her head. "You're not going to do anything, Matteo." That amused me. "Oh, you don't have proof," she said. "You have guesses, theories. And if you try to make trouble for me, all you're going to do is make yourself look desperate." She was testing me, trying to see if I'd flinch first. But I didn't, because I had something better than proof. I had leverage. I smirked. Who said I needed proof? Her eyes narrowed. I took a slow step forward. "You think I'm stupid, Charlotte? You think I haven't already started making calls?" Her face barely changed, but I could feel the tension shift. I shrugged. "Jonas Reed might be your guy, but let's just say, he's not exactly the only one in his business." That got her. For the first time, she looked worried. I made a few friends," I said. "And guess what? They love information." Her lips parted slightly. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling casually. "Because I wonder what your new start is going to look like if, oh, I don't know, certain people start getting calls about your little erasure project." Charlotte's jaw clenched. I smiled. "Thought so." She swallowed. "What do you want?" There it is. I let the silence drag out, just long enough for her to feel the weight of the situation. Then, finally, I answered. "You're going to leave," I said. "But not on your terms." She exhaled sharply. "Matteo, no more money. No more new start. No quiet little escape where you get to rewrite history. Her hands curled into fists. You disappear, I continued, and you don't take anything with you. No secret accounts. No safety net. You walk away with exactly what you left behind. Nothing. She stared at me. I stared right back. And then, after a long, tense pause, Charlotte exhaled and nodded. I had one. Not just the argument. Not just the breakup. I had taken back everything she thought she could steal from me. And the best part? She knew it. Charlotte left that night. No grand exit. No dramatic speeches. Just a woman who thought she had planned everything, only to find out that, for the first time in her life, she had miscalculated. I locked the door behind her, and then, for the first time in years, I smiled. Cold revenge never felt so good. Charlotte was gone. Just like that. No dramatic screaming, no fake tears, no last-minute attempt to spin the situation in her favor. She walked out with exactly what I allowed her to take. Nothing. I should have felt relieved. I should have popped open a drink and toasted to my own brilliance. But there was still one thing bothering me. I still didn't know exactly what she had been erasing. I knew she had been cheating. That much was obvious. But there was something more to it. Charlotte wasn't the type to burn an entire life to the ground just for a simple affair. No, this had been something bigger. Something planned. Something that required hiring Jonas Reed to make it disappear. And the worst part? I was still sitting in the dark, even after I had one. That needed to change. I picked up her laptop, the one she had so carelessly left behind. I had already gone through it once, but this time, I was looking for something specific. And then I found it. An email, buried under an account she probably thought I'd never check. The subject line? List confirmed. No further action required. I clicked it open, and there it was. A list of names. A very long list. At first, I thought it was just business contacts or old acquaintances. But then I started recognizing names. Men. Women. Names I knew. And suddenly, it hit me. Charlotte hadn't just been cheating. She had been running a full-time operation. This wasn't a one-time mistake or even a double life. This was a lifestyle choice. A carefully constructed network of affairs with multiple partners, men and women, all carefully compartmentalized so they never overlapped. I scrolled through the list, my stomach turning as I saw familiar names. A former coworker, a friend of hers I had met at a party, a former client of mine. It was a tangled mess of personal and professional, all carefully maintained, until now. And Jonas Reed? He wasn't just helping her cover up one affair. He was helping her wipe away everything. The digital footprints, the conversations, the proof that she had spent years carefully curating this secret life. I leaned back in my chair, letting it all sink in. Charlotte had been living in stereo. One life with me. Another life. No, multiple lives. Everywhere else. And she had almost gotten away with it. Almost. I smirked. It was time for the final move. Charlotte had spent years balancing these lives, making sure no one knew about the others. That was her biggest fear, being exposed, losing control of the narrative. So I did what she feared most. I compiled everything, the emails, the transaction records, the details, and then I sent it to everyone on the list. I didn't add any dramatic explanations. No accusations. No angry outbursts. Just one simple message. It looks like Charlotte forgot to say goodbye. Figured you all might want to reconnect. And then I hit send. The fallout? Immediate. Charlotte's phone, which she had left behind, started lighting up with frantic messages. Some confused. Some furious. Some clearly from people who had no idea they weren't the only ones. I leaned back, watching as the chaos unfolded. She had built this world so carefully, so precisely. And I had taken it all apart with one email. No screaming. No fighting. Just the quiet, satisfying sound of her entire web collapsing. I exhaled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Charlotte was gone. And this time, she wasn't walking away with a clean slate. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel